enough about the Green Lantern to say, yes, I want to go for this role. But when Martin Campbell showed me the art for this film and showed me what it was that they were planning on doing, I was hooked. It's just the most captivating thing you'll ever see. I felt like a little kid again.
The first time I went into that room with all the production art and saw what they had done with the Green Lantern Corps and Oa and the Guardians, I was blown away. I couldn't believe the effort and the authenticity. They took the original material from all our books throughout the years and built this movie on it.
We're creating a universe. We're also creating a world, a terrestrial world here on Earth. It's not just a movie about a guy from Earth, but it's about him going to a place that no one on Earth has ever seen before. So finding an angle on that has been one of the most fantastic parts of this.
This is an old skull. It's all rotted away, isn't it? They're just using it as a texture.
We have a group of concept artists who come together, and what I would try and do is to start the ball rolling. Let's go out there and sort of kick around ideas.
Since time immemorial, the Green Lantern Corps has served as the keepers of peace, order, and justice throughout the universe.
For me, the first thing is to be true to the characters and respectful of the fan base, but you can't do it too literal because some of it just wouldn't work directly pulled off the page. Some of them were so insanely obscure that it would seem impossible to be able to make them work. I just love that challenge. Kilowog and Tomare were most challenging because they're the most scrutinized by everyone, producers, directors, everyone involved, because they have to hold up close. They really got to look good down to the pore.
Can I train them? Or can I train them?
Kilowog is an interesting looking character to begin with. He looks like he's a thug, but he's a very sensitive, intelligent character. Aaron Sims was involved for quite some time before I came on board. I was given his Kilowog to then evolve further, explore other nuances of his face.
We've been spending time working up his facial characteristics, to make him into somebody that we can be scared of and be angry with and laugh at and all these sorts of things. He's probably the most popular character in the Green Lantern Corps.
As you are the first to be chosen, I have been sent to welcome you here.
Tomare is based on the comic book character quite closely, so we've been paying a lot of attention to getting all of his look right.
Tomare was a tough one, and same as Kilowog, it was started with a number of different designers, but I know that I took Aaron Sims' base and started to evolve that. Played with body types and facial features and details, but then it came down to final skin color and trying to get that perfect chicken lizard skin.
At the centre of the planet is this huge void, and in the middle of the void is the central battery. And there's been a lot of work gone into tying together the central battery in terms of its design with the portable batteries.
The lantern had to be specifically designed for our version of the story. We had to come up with the origin, where it was from, why it was there. The lantern also has to have a quality that has been passed on from generation to generation. Almost like a king sword or a king gun. The craftsmanship that went into it was very important. Not completely ornate, so it's not functional, but understood that this was a very, very powerful part of the lantern core to be passed on from one lantern to the next.
We've been working on ring designs and lantern designs for basically a year and a half. We massaged it a little bit and we had a version made that Martin and Donald kind of quite liked a lot of, but the costume design. Nyla was unhappy with the overall sort of feeling of it.
So it became such a collaboration to get that ring out. It was so important. I wanted it to have a gravitas to it. So we sat down and sort of completely reconceived it as something sort of bigger and chunkier. At the same time, the art department was doing something very similar.
The story's been told 100 times over and over again in comic books and in different media, but the way that we were telling it had to be new and exceptional. It had to be something so fantastic that it would attract a new audience as well as please the old audience.
It was a moment of pride that we could all share, all of us involved, that we did make the right decision pushing the envelope.
It's been very wide open on this, and I think as a result we've been able to think very laterally and kind of come up with the funkiest ideas. You know, it's been a lot of fun doing that.
There isn't anything you can do that they can't do better.
I got it. Okay, now let's get these pants off and fly some planes. Fighter jets are going to be breathtaking. At the same time, they're not going to feel polished.
Eyeball, those sabers can fly any way you can.
You sure about that, Carl?
Ryan really stepped up to the plate with that stuff, whether it be blue screen or being in harnesses in the plane. He's very, very good at that.
Fling it about, either side, weaving it about.
The first part of the task was just getting the whole sequence planned, and that was done on a wall chart. From that, we designed a previs sequence.
The mandate that Martin asked us to do to make this sequence exciting was to keep it as real as possible.
We did a lot of research on the fighter pilots and watched a lot of videos, and we had pilots on set advising us.
As you bank, you're watching the guy at your 12 o'clock, and then once you are sure that you're not going to smack into him, start looking to where you're going.
I had the chance right from the start working with Martin Campbell to really give him inputs on, like, that's a really bogus statement. No one would say that. Hey, when you're showing the pilots, please show them with their masks up. You know, just lay it on the line and make things as realistic as possible.
Cleared weapons, hot at the merge.
Ferris test Sapphire, weapons are hot.
Whatever we shot had to be done by a real airplane that was flying along with the F-35s.
So things like the aircraft dynamics, the behavior of the aircraft, the environments that they're flying in, these all had to be very carefully judged.
That helped inform us to give a better dynamics of the plane, how they would fly in formation, how they would do dogfighting. The dogfight took close to 8 months.
From that, obviously, we made our shooting plan in terms of the actors.
We're just going to do a little bit of movement test here, Ryan Love, all right?
We did do some motion of the fuselage section that we had on the stage, and we threw it around as much as we could.
We had this like mini pod plane set up and climb a tall ladder and up way high. It felt like, you know, being in a ride at Disneyland. We had a microphone in our ear, and Martin would talk to us in our ear before takes because you can't hear anyone.
Well done, darling. So settle yourself down. Have you looking there, just glancing off to your right there. Stand by. Action.
There are things that you just can't really emulate. You have to get the actors to do it, like the effect of gravity, how body behaves in tight turns.
Bogey at 12 o'clock, and now! Cut it.
Martin works very closely with the storyboards and his previs, so he has a very good idea for every shot, exactly what the action should be.
So basically I just do the sequences the way I think they should be done.
Hal tries to hold the controls, but the cocky pilot is suddenly scared and the warning lights are flashing now. Just rock it out, Hal. You've got it.
Well, any sequence you shoot in this film, you have no idea what it's going to be like. Everything you do is on the sound stage, and then it is brought to life in post, and then it is a fully functioning, three-dimensional world.
We did construct a full-size UCAV, a mock-up. That's in other sequences, it's a sort of a prop piece, but we didn't use it at all in the dogfight sequence. We scanned it and we took textures from it, but all the UCAVs you see in the dogfight are CGI.
Character terms to make that play through. You can have all the jets and the quick cuts, but if it's not playing into the story and it's not playing the characters, then it's not doing anything.
Sure enough, the sabers are shuddering. Hal climbs above them, the F-35 starting to tremble now. We see it wide, the tiny plane struggling to escape Earth, then shaking as they falter. Warning lights flash. The sabers are still right on his tail. Hal rolls over and races them down. He takes aim, and he opens fire!
The suit is one of the most iconic elements of Green Lantern.
The costume in the books is made by the ring, so it's all a construct, it's energy that washes kind of across the Green Lantern.
I received an enormous package of the comics. I read them all, and what it said to me was, my God, nothing's changed since 1958, or when the costume was first designed. So it was like, okay, this one is well solidified in people's minds. Where am I going to go from there? And I could see that we needed to really reinvent the approach to superhero costumes. And we're talking about a character who is effectively formed in outer space in an alien environment, so I wanted to take full advantage of that. It began with really bad drawings, you know, like just sketching out things, testing ideas. How's the chest working to the shoulder? How's the shoulder working to the hand?
So it's probably, I don't know how many iterations, it must be in the 50s, 60s, 70s. A lot.
And what are the characteristics of Hal Jordan? Well, I went for aerodynamic because this guy is a pilot. And I wanted to create a suit which, like a plane or anything that moves fast through space, has extraordinary design lines, detail, perfect design resolution in motion. And then I combined that with the anatomy of the human body. From my experience, I was expecting to build a costume and then add over it the visual effects element. As we began to explore it and the nature of what we're attempting to do with this character, it became more and more obvious that we had to go one way or the other. And the one thing that we're all very determined to do is not make a rubber suit. We wanted something so fresh for the fans that it really did start to become obvious that we needed to go all the way with the visual effects.
Ah, green! Wow. I know, right?
When Hal arrives on Oa, he goes through an induction process, and part of that induction process is giving him the suit. And the suit is created by the ring, and the suit really is a suit of energy.
I was understandably skeptical, I think, at first about the idea of a computer-generated costume, but once you delve into the film's mythology for the character, which is that this costume is a manifestation of your will, it was the only way to do it. And I like the idea that it comes on and off according to the ring bearer's will. You can't just unzip something, you have to, you know, it has to snap right on.
He puts the ring on, right, knows this, changes, right?
Wow, I'm never getting used to that.
It was the only way to do it. And I think it was a fresh way to do it as well, something we hadn't seen before.
The reason I like it is because it's more in tune with the lore. It's not going to be him in a leather suit.
In order to get the suit right, we had to start testing it as early as possible. Not only from a technical point of view, where we wanted to make sure that we could photograph an actor pretty much doing what he likes. Free-forming, running, fighting, jumping, all the stuff that the Green Lantern would have to go through.
3, 2, 1, action!
And so you can't just put a suit on, you have to wear something else in order for them to map it onto your body. So how they did that was using a motion capture suit, which has all these dots, and you look like a crash test dummy.
The role of tracking for creating the Green Lantern suit played a huge part in getting the initial action and motion of the suit.
We scanned Ryan so that we got his general body proportions, but most importantly his joint positions. All his joints and arms and bones to be the same length as Ryan so that the tracking would work. But we wanted it to be, you know, like this perfect human. So we took Nyla's artwork, we modeled it in 3D, and then it was a very long process of back and forth and just muscle by muscle sculpting that body.
There's muscles of the abdomen, the inner and outer obliques that are contracting and flexing, and all of that's tied in to the simple process of delivering dialogue. And if it's not there, it does in fact look like a head on a stick. So we spent an inordinate amount of time really finessing those kinds of details in these characters.
But we had to technically make sure that tied on to his neck and when he has the mask onto his face. And it has to be absolutely pixel perfect. There's no room for error. You can't have any sliding. It has to be sort of pore perfect, if you will.
Cool.
And then within that skin and within the modeling, there's what we call the muscle lines. And within the muscle lines, we then run energy, much like sort of blood through veins.
Right, now should we just do one on camera, boys? Okay, right.
So, this is the human.
Yeah, once we'd sort of nailed the Green Lantern suit, the other suits fell in pretty quickly, actually. We were all surprised. Sinestro kind of worked out the box. We had the right green and we had the energy ideas. We put them all together, and with Mark Strong's head on top, it was a big transformation for everyone to see him suddenly fully there and looking like Sinestro.
And now!
Will is what makes you take action.
The CGI suit is going to give me the physique of the comic, and I can see why they've done that. If you're faithfully recreating that, the best way to do it, I think, is the idea of part animation. I like the idea that some of you will be drawn, because it's obviously then a direct link back to the comic.
And with Sinestro, he's an older Green Lantern, and I wanted the connection to exist between Hal and Sinestro in terms of their costume, that Sinestro was sort of stuck in a certain place, very authoritarian, so his suit is an older version.
It was for this moment that we were created. We will seek out and fight this enemy.
And what was very important in the magic ingredient was the actor's performance, because that really translated it, because from when you're in the CG environment to this rather lifeless object, you suddenly put Ryan Reynolds in there and what he brought to the role, and that really contributed to making the suit live.
The result is great. I'm very proud of the result.
It's all of the internal workings of the suit that really justify having a digital suit in the first place.
Literally the first time we saw it, everyone went, wow, that is so cool.
I do 3, 2, 1, and on 1 you look, action we go. Great. Action!
Feel that? It's the gravitational pull of your average sun.
When Hal gets to Oa, he goes through some physical training and about how you make constructs and how you do battle as a Green Lantern.
It's like the instruction manual to the Green Lantern Corps, how the ring works, how the mind works. It's a training program to become fully-fledged Green Lantern.
Welcome to Ring Slinging 101, or as I like to call it, the worst day of your worthless life.
The total visual effects number for the film was approximately 1,400 shots.
Putting together the training platform was a daunting task.
And we've been working on it from day one. It's just a huge model, a huge environment.
Was probably one of the toughest sequences because of the evolution that we went through on that and the amount of business that's happening in there.
These things you have to plan out very carefully.
I'm here. When he raises the gun, I'm there, right? On your third burst, I'll be here, and you lower the gun.
You know, the training platforms is the area where we see the constructs used the most.
The ring's limits are only what you can imagine.
His moment with Tomarei at the beginning, the construct that he creates, that little moment where they have where he starts to get the idea of what creating a construct is all about.
Construct is basically the ring bearer's will and imagination manifested by the ring. So it's anything you can think of, and typically it's used by Green Lanterns in battle.
A lot of the constructs were scripted originally, and some we changed when we got into shooting itself.
Then smack them.
The constructs were originally conceived as flat 2D artwork by the art department, then handed over to Sony, who then will build the 3D models.
The effect of creating constructs and blasting requires about 10 or 15 different layers of effects.
I fear nothing.
Because of the nature of the constructs, their scale, their size, how they appeared, the brevity they appeared for and how they disappeared, we had to make sure we allowed for the framing to obviously accommodate like a jet engine or a machine gun.
So before shooting any scene, we had to nail down exactly what the construct was, the timing it would come on, you know, how big it was, and how it would interact with the characters.
A lot of this was realized in storyboards as well. Some of these moments where Hal gets his feet clamped down in the boots and constructing the table.
Let's see what you got.
Kilowog puts Hal through the physical contortions of training.
Yeah, let me help you.
Finishing that off, we finish with him and Sinestro together.
This is the human. He tests him in a traditional fight, but using constructs created by their rings. A sword. Oh, human.
It gives Hal a horse whipping.
I do believe I smell fear.
We had to go into each shot knowing what the construct was going to be. Ryan Reynolds had to know what the construct was so he could react suitably. And Mark Strong had to know what the construct so he could react suitably as well.
It's hand-to-hand combat. They're creating one construct, that one gets knocked over, the other one gets created. That was orchestrated over many, many weeks before we actually shot that.
Then let's do it. And that was choreographed with our stunt coordinator, Gary, and with Grant Major, production designer, to make sure we came up with a really cool set of tools they could use during that fight.
Will is what makes you take action. Fear is what stops you.
Then once you shoot it, you know, you come back and you edit it all together, and then even from then, the work just started.
And started basically pre-vising the entire sequence, and then deciding where in this environment they were going to be from shot to shot. At one point, there was 2 levels to the platform. They began on the top platform. He got hammered through and got bounced down to the bottom platform. And all these details were being worked out, constantly going back into the edit process and refining and tightening it up. All the while, the environment guys were in there building the Owen environment.
So then now you could tie your characters into that with both lighting and effects. And of course, you have all your timings of, you know, when they create their constructs. And so you start putting together all the effects for the constructs and you start layering it together. Many artists were involved with every shot, from layout, match moving, getting the suit tracking. If one thing didn't work in that puzzle, you'd lose your audience from the beginning.
Your constructs are only going to be as strong as your will, and your will is pathetic.
As the actor, you really have to put your faith in the hardworking artists behind the scenes to make this thing really pop off the screen in a unique and incredible way.
It's bizarre, but the more difficult something is, the bigger the mountain you have to climb, the more effort you have to put in. When you sit there and you see it on the big screen, it's worth it. You must ignore your fear. Lanterns, united, we are still invincible. We have never been defeated. Will we be defeated now?
The Green Lantern Corps is an intergalactic police force made up of aliens chosen from various space sectors across the universe.
The comic book inspired the look of the Corps quite a bit. That's where the designers pulled from. Then we also got to kind of go off on our own and add some really cool aspects to it.
So keep this a little smoother than you have it, but then these ridges could actually be a little more bumpy.
Okay.
I think it is important to remain faithful to the characters that fanboys have known and loved.
You want to be a lantern? You gotta commit to the core.
It's also exciting for us to be able to present something to a fan base that is very familiar with these characters in a way that they've never seen it before.
It was for this moment that we were created. I don't need to tell you who we are.
What we did was we took the 25 strongest characters, or the most common characters in the comics, and we had those all modeled.
It was challenging to create the 25 Corps by the sheer number of them.
Are you afraid, human?
The Corps just visually are stunning, and they're just so diverse.
The Guardians have charged me to lead a squadron of our strongest lanterns in an assault on Parallax.
Well, for each of the 25 Green Lantern Corps, we had the design of the creature without his suit. And that's where we started.
We handpicked painstakingly and designed each one of those 25 characters down to where they wear their ring. They each have their own movement patterns, how they land or walk or fly or crawl, and it's really cool.
We went through the process of doing all kinds of movement studies. Pushing the physics is always what makes it more entertaining and more interesting.
Yeah, I like that. That's perfect. We've had to rig them to move realistically and, of course, come up with all the textures and bring them to life and then add their own signature energies to them.
The ring's limits are only what you can imagine.
Their physiology always had some connection to something we could sort of wrap our heads around.
You do want to tie in movements that people are used to. So we do draw from our own experiences with, say, like a jellyfish. You have like this crocodile guy.
Kilowog, who's 9 foot tall.
Orchavius.
Gallus said.
Gahoo is this kind of gnarly looking warrior.
Salak, who we show a quick shot of in the film.
This skeleton thing.
We had much more fun with the other characters like Amanita, who's the mushroom guy.
There's a character that is essentially a butterfly girl, Remy Hull.
Princess Alande, and then Boudica, which are the sort of female ones, which are very much sort of bipedal, humanoid type.
There were a couple of key figures in Hal's life, Kilowog and Tomar-Re.
I am Tomar-Re, protector of Sector 28113 and home to
80,012 galaxies, 2.34 million sentient species.
Tomar-Re is a sage, wise, brilliant character, and he is kind of a half bird, half fish-like.
Talking fish.
Actually, my race is Zidarian. He is mentoring the young Hal Jordan, who's the first human to be selected to be part of the core. The ring chose you. It wouldn't have done so if it hadn't seen something in you.
For a character like Tomar-Re, the challenge there is making something that's both strong, warrior-like, but also very stately. He was one character that we really wanted to make beautiful. His actions, his motions tie back to the bird-like qualities.
Martin really wanted a graceful fluidity to this character.
Join me.
The flight characteristics of Tomar-Re, we experimented with how does he maneuver when he actually flies through the air. In the end, what we ultimately settled on was something like water ballet. And it contrasted with someone like Kilowog, who's much more of a brute.
Never let your guard down, Poozer.
Kilowog is this great, gentle giant. He is a kind of rhino-like alien character. He's huge, he's like 11 feet tall. He's pure brawn.
The challenges in bringing Kilowog to life had a lot to do with how his skin was going to respond, how the large armor-like skin could be tough, but also be flexible enough to give him the power and strength that a character like Kilowog would have. We developed some simulation techniques to get the skin to roll and fold and move in a way that had a weight to it.
The weight on this feels perfect. This is right where it needs to be. He does the ring blast, he starts getting pulled in by the gravity, and it's that same feel we need to just carry on into the next one.
A big part of making those characters work is, of course, the performance capture, the voice work.
Welcome to Oa. It was created for us by the Guardians.
Those parts are very important. They really do support the movie.
The human ain't never seen one before. I am Kilowog.
The truth of the matter is you need them to make those parts sing.
As lanterns, we must fight with all our will and destroy evil wherever it may hide.
Set. Action.
The Green Lantern Corps is an intergalactic police force run by the Guardians of the Universe, who are these ancient beings on the planet Oa. It's like kind of the police precinct of the universe, and they've been around for billions of years.
Think of them as the Supreme Court. They created the planet, they created the Green Lanterns.
When Hal Jordan is chosen as the first human being to be a Green Lantern, it's really kind of looked down upon by the rest of the Guardians.
Guardians, this young lantern wishes to appeal your decision.
The designs of the Guardians were pulled fairly directly from the comic books.
The way the Guardians look and the details on the Guardians as you go closer to them, on Ganthet in particular, very, very cool. It's exactly what anyone who loves Green Lantern could dream of.
We are aware of the threat
They want to feel slightly above the more temporal kind of goings-on of Oa. So I wanted to get them in the highest place. So almost like their heads are in the stars. They sit on the very top of the highest peak.
There stands their citadel. They are immortals among the most ancient of races.
Grant was specific in terms of we need to do a guardian citadel for this amount of guardians to sit.
There are these seats that are arranged in a circle, and each seat is where a guardian sits overlooking the whole of Oa, stretched out below them.
So I came up with this idea of doing the circle of these guardians. I think in the obsidian architecture of it, over the eons that they've been sitting there on these thrones, just the sheer power of their thought has put grooves in the rock, because these guys theoretically had been there for millions of years.
This planet has been our home for countless millennia. It was created for us by the Guardians.
These guardians are in fact quite small. They're only about 3 feet high. They've all got these blue heads, and their robes have been designed to be very, very long, so you never really see their bodies. They're shrouded in these red capes.
Their robes are these really long, kind of velvet-like, but if you look closely in the shadows, you could actually see hints of the galaxies and the rest of the universe in them.
They feel like they are almost disembodied in a way. Their heads as well have been designed with this sort of translucent quality to them.
You dare accuse the Guardians of feeling fear?
Yes, I do. And that's exactly why Parallax is beating you, because you're afraid to even admit you're afraid.
When you were shooting the Guardians scenes, we put up C-stands with tennis balls on to represent where the Guardians were placed. But there are only 2 Guardians that talk and 1 Guardian that listens. So the 2 that talk were represented by actors on little cherry picker lifts. So they could deliver lines and they could offer a decent eye line for the actors.
You must let me take the fight to this new enemy.
Your passion to protect those in your charge is commendable.
Filming it physically and practically is really interesting, because you have to remember you are in space. We are in this big room with blue walls, and we had to develop a physicality of how to show that.
Action. The inhabitants of 2 worlds annihilated by an unknown enemy.
For me, it just looks like a bunch of walls and blue screen when I'm shooting it, but 8, 9, 10 months later, it is a fully functioning 3-dimensional world.
The Guardians, although they have similar physical qualities, they all have very different looks. They've got different size ears, they've got different noses. They're all quite different beings. What they do share is a similar skin tone, which is just off Smurf blue.
Finding that right tone of blue that wasn't too saturated was difficult. To get the sense of subsurface value under the skin that gives them life, but also be enough of a difference to really read that translucency was definitely a challenge.
There is much of which you are not aware, Sinestro.
The Guardians had their own particular series of challenges. Specifically, they're very, very old, but you don't want to go too dry, because then they start looking like husks.
And then you throw in the component of very dark aged skin, which has a drier, less saturated color tones to it. It was interesting to find the balance of that outer layer of less saturated blue and the inner layer of glow that still gave them some life.
The second challenge, they had these sort of blisters on their heads, these gel-filled craniums.
The back of their heads are this odd gelatinous membrane that reflects in it the universe.
The craniums were part of the original design of the Guardians. They were kind of fun because they had to reflect, obviously, the Oan environment, the sky. At the same time, they had to refract the seats behind them. So it was just a question of playing with the amount of density. Make sure they weren't too transparent or they just disappear, and they weren't too dense, then they don't become translucent anymore. The third challenge was animating the Guardians. Because of their age, Martin's direction, these were very stoic. Not pretentious, but they sort of listen.
According to Abin Sur's last transmission, he seemed to know what it was. His only words were, "It's parallax."
As stoic as they are, they don't emote much, but when they do talk, there's just a subtlety in their performances, and I think that's the key thing. The staging here, real quick, just play through it.
It was kind of challenged in the short shots you see them in to put enough animation into the Guardians to make sure they looked alive.
And it really is all in the subtlety. It's just in the little saccadic eye movements, just little touches that keep them in that realm without overacting. And making their faces as pliable as we could possibly make them, so that when they do talk, it is a full sort of facial experience.
We are assessing the situation.
Even though the eyes aren't moving much, it doesn't need much. It's just little movements in the eyes, tied very specifically to the timing of the dialogue, so that the 2 of those mesh really well.
Help me save my planet. Don't give in to fear. Fight it. Fight it with me.
Your words are compelling, young human.
But as immortals, we must measure our actions over billions of years and the fate of the universe.
For me, it just looks amazing, and it's just mystifying, and gorgeous, and baffling, and all at once.
Is that what I think it is? An alien life form, Doctor. The first that mankind has ever encountered.
The exciting part of this project were the characters, the alien characters that were going to be done practical as makeups, Sinestro, Hector, and Abin Sur. With characters like this that have been established in the comics, you want the fans to be happy, you want that iconic character to be translated. Yet, when you're dealing with your performer, you want them to be as comfortable as possible wearing the prosthetics.
For Hector, we were extremely fortunate to have Peter Sarsgaard do this character. Not only was he relishing the fact to have these prosthetics, in his own words, it just really helped his character. He just took it to a whole nother level.
Translating something that's two-dimensional, whether it be a comic book or a piece of production art, to 3 dimensions on a performer, it's always challenging. We sculpted a series of maquettes. Because he goes through a transformation, his head gets progressively larger throughout the film. So we started with a human head structure and kind of gauged what would be interesting and still achieve the effect without getting into the realm of ridiculous.
I like this one. Everyone does.
We did more than half a dozen tests for the various stages of Peter's transformation.
There's Hector with the receding hairline wig, which is why I have a shaved head. Also, I have to have a shaved head underneath the prosthetics because it makes it a lot easier to deal with. Actually, the mustache and the wig were pretty uncomfortable because of the lace and itching against your skin.
For the first stage of Hector, Peter was in the chair maybe 2 hours.
And then, of course, stage 2, big head, getting more Krona-like. The character Krona turns into Parallax, and we're trying to get Hector to get looking more like Krona because he gets infected.
Then the next phase is from here up, covered. The only parts of it that are my face are the tip of my nose here, and then underneath my mustache right there.
You've changed. At the same time, you don't want to totally lose the actor behind layers of silicone or rubber. You want to leave a good portion of them there and carefully design the look.
It takes 4 hours. So if I go in at 3 in the morning, then I'm ready to shoot at 7 or 8. It's stuck to your skin. These are medical grade materials they are using, so it really sticks.
We try to go as thin as possible, which allows for the maximum amount of movement.
And it gets heavy.
I would say at least 10 pounds of silicone, maybe 12. It's a lot.
With Peter's makeup, because there's so much mass to it, in the last 2-3 stages, every part of his head is covered.
Got it?
It's going to trap heat because silicone is a non-porous material. It's like wearing a rubber glove on your head.
Because if I get sweaty, the appliance starts to collapse in different ways.
The heat builds, and that's going to have a tendency to pull free.
So I have to stay cool. There's this device I put my hand into that football players use, and they turn it on, and all of the veins here and in your hand get iced down basically and cool down your blood. And they found that it's much more efficient than even sticking your hand in a bucket of water.
I've never felt better in my life.
Abin Sur's look was probably the hardest to translate. If you don't do it right, it has a tendency to look cartoony.
There was one maquette made for Abin Sur, which is behind me in the background. At that time, we really didn't know who was going to be cast to play Abin Sur.
It's sort of an external musculature that you're reading on him.
There are quite a few pieces. There's a neck appliance, there's a skull cap piece, and then there are forehead and facial pieces that he wears. And then all those get tied in with color. It went through several makeup tests. We had to make color samples, and those were photographed under different lighting conditions. And it did take quite a while before we did finally arrive at the right solutions.
Well, now turn up here again, Tim. Wham! And fist up, as it's like today.
As far as Abin Sur goes, the challenge with his skin tone is that we're taking a otherworldly character and an otherworldly skin tone and translating it into the real world.
To apply Tim's makeup, it took close to 4 hours because it was a little more meticulous.
It's quite a slimline kind of prosthetic makeup on me.
Tim was great. He was the first performer we got.
Putting up with the makeup is the biggest challenge. So I did a film years and years ago, The Island of Dr. Moreau, so I got a lot of training and
contending with the prosthetic makeup. But the funny thing is, once you've done one, you go, I swear I will never do that again. And here I am, doing it again.
If you translated Sinestro line for line from an illustration from the comic, it's going to look angular. It's going to take you out of the realm of reality.
Are you afraid, human?
Until we heard who was going to play Sinestro, did we know exactly where we were going to be headed with him.
Shall we?
We started sculpting the look of Sinestro on his life cast. The hair was something that always came up that was like, well, what are we going to do with his hair?
You're trying to strike a balance between someone that's got a lot of strength in his face but doesn't look too sinister.
And I will tolerate no weaklings.
The ears slightly changed shape and direction. There was just fine tweaking that went on literally from the beginning. I think there were 4 or 5 tests.
There is no way you can succeed.
With Mark, you had to kind of keep him sleek and keep the makeup as close to him as possible so that a lot of the character comes from Mark. It exudes from him.
Aliens from the planet Corrigar are magenta or red, so there's a number of passes of makeup that are made to give him that color.
We actually use a color on Sinestro, which is a tattoo color called French Quarter Fuchsia, which I think is very appropriate considering where we made the movie. When we do prosthetic makeups, we use an airbrush for maybe 75% of it. You don't want to use an airbrush for the entire process because then it's going to look airbrushed. But to create a natural skin tone or even an otherworldly skin tone, you're breaking up the skin or the prosthetic with multiple color passes. So when you get in close, it looks believable. It looks like there's things going on under the skin, a circulatory system.
When you see it on film, it looks like flesh, it looks organic.
I'm a Green Lantern. I fear nothing.
Mark came really well researched with everything. He knows exactly what Sinestro is all about, what he is, what he has been, and where he's going with it.
Sinestro is a bit of a giveaway, isn't it?
This is a big visual effects film where you actually have to create worlds and characters. So creating Parallax is very exciting.
We're working to really create something visual and something tangible that is frightening.
It was my greatest dream realized when I walked into that room and saw what they had done with Parallax. It was brought to life before my eyes. I was blown away.
One of my favorites, Parallax.
It's largely the work of an artist, Justin Sweet. We all had a go at it, of course, and as the ideas became more refined, it sort of came to be based around the husks, the spent husks of alien beings that have been consumed by Krona.
All these appendages of fear, terror.
Yeah, it is.
They're all built to terrorize people, to raise that fear, to get them more.
I think it is. Yeah, they instill fear in people, and when the fear is there, then that's what they go for, and they wrench that out. And you can imagine it'd be agonising. So in a way, the agony that you face when you die is still within the faces of these creatures.
For Parallax, Martin's idea originally was that we wanted to create something that wasn't so much a specific alien monster. It was something more amorphous. I think he looked at one guy's image originally. It was sort of this kind of oil spill or something, light kind of coming through it a little bit. And Martin kind of liked that idea.
Parallax, it started off as a thing called Legion, and it sort of has its roots in this word Legion, where to me that suggests like a horde, like an army. We've then come to grips with what it looks like visually, and we've always liked the idea of it not being a ghost. It's actually something that's tangible and that is able to consume you, to eat you, rip you apart.
This idea of all these souls being massed together and screaming in everlasting pain, it's like illustrating water. It's only the shape of whatever's containing it.
When we look at it texturally, it's a conglomeration of alien species that has all become this sort of textural mass. Krona's face will be able to push itself out. It's almost like the way that a school of fish or a flock of birds is able to act like in concert with each other. The first sort of step we do after concept art is to build the same thing as a 3D model. So you'd be able to kind of look around and have a schematic kind of look at it, and then add character, personality to its face. So it's a very interactive process and very collaborative.
Just bringing life or movement to Parallax was a three-step process. First, we created these pods, or sometimes we called them bananas because they were yellow and they looked like these bananas just kind of doing their predator type thing. And then within it, the effects team run massive agents within it.
This is actually a small section of these. We run procedural animation on it so they somewhat interact with each other.
You know, we had animators going in there and animating each bone and each skull. We'll never get the film out. So they had to animate the body and then all the bones had to correspond. If you tweak one thing that isn't working, then something else might pop out.
And then if Krona's head appeared, that was yet another step where we'd hand animate the main head of Krona coming out.
One of the challenges with Parallax was actually a scale issue. We worked on him originally really close up and you could see all the writhing skeletons. And then as soon as we got wide on Parallax, he became more of a grey blob. So we had to go back in and rework Parallax so he worked in the wide scenes.
As we got wider and wider in the streets, it's the scale of it was kind of a little hard to wrap your head around. Those shots are tricky because you're also trying to show all this detail of what it is and all these souls, but you're going wider and wider and it's just this huge giant wall.
Obviously there's a lot of work to make sure he interacts with the environment, to make sure he casts shadows, to make sure he doesn't bump into things or go through them. So he was very much like a sort of bag of snakes. I think Martin called him a bag of maggots.
And a city shot where he's running through the city and interacting with buildings and attacking people, it can get pretty complex. And you're forced to kind of recreate in 3D space those buildings, what those people are doing as they're running down the street. You actually have to copy their movements into the computer and have the geometry interact with it.
So it's always difficult to do these sort of characters and to get it right, and thankfully I think they pulled it off.
All the effects, they're very complex. That was really tough on them, but they all worked their butts off. I must say they were marvelous.
I love the character, I love the mythology.
It was cool. It was awesome.
I remember seeing it and saying, oh, that's a cool looking character.
Really, it plays an important role for the DC Universe.
Julie Schwartz virtually recreated the DC Pantheon in 1959 after superheroes, with a few exceptions, had been dormant.
You had a point of time in the mid to late 50s where the superhero comics were starting to get a level of resurgence. You have the space race occurring, and they looked at the Green Lantern franchise and found a way to take what was happening at that moment, which is this explosion into science fiction and into outer space, and really reinvent the character.
He had Gil Kane design a very modern costume with a science fiction rationale.
He started as the pilot. A lot of us as kids, we wanted to be pilots.
If you're like me and were a kid reading these comic book stories, we're talking 60s, every kid could put on a ring and kind of pretend that they could fly, that they could imagine something that might project from the ring and be Green Lantern.
These guys were doing some pretty special stuff back then.
What made Green Lantern so special is being part of something bigger.
Green Lantern keeps evolving. What's nice is he's kept up with the time.
When Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams took on Green Lantern and Green Arrow, they did something that had never been done in comic books before. They did it extremely well. They really grounded the character for the first time. They brought Hal Jordan and Oliver Queen, Green Lantern and Green Arrow, down to the streets and dealt with a lot of things that were being dealt with in the country itself.
It was presented to me as, we want to continue publishing this character, but it's not doing very well. So I thought, well, I had done a couple of socially relevant, mildly socially relevant pieces earlier. It had been done before in comics, but not much. And I don't think it had ever been the heart of a comic book series before. I had an idea of what I wanted from Green Lantern, what function he would have to serve in the ongoing narrative, and we drafted Green Arrow to serve the opposite function, to give us kind of a dialectic, two sides. These guys are friends, but they don't agree on everything. One of them, as I said, is the best cop who ever lives, but let's give him some reason to question his assumptions.
They grounded the character. What these guys together did is made it relevant. They figured, The hell, if nobody's reading us, at least let's make a point. They really had passion for a lot of the social ills of the time and making a statement. And not being as coy. It wasn't as much metaphor. On some things, they were hitting things straight on the head.
It made an impact. It wasn't in the background and sort of around the story. It was the story.
The response was hugely favorable. And Neil and I found ourselves going to universities and going on radio talk shows, none of which had happened before. Comics were the lame stepchild of American media. It was supposed to be dumb in the conception of a lot of people. A lot of things had to come together. Julie's willingness to let us experiment. The fact that Neil and I had been in the racket about 5 years at that point, and we had our toolkits together. We knew how to do comics. A couple of years earlier, we might not have been ready. Feeling fairly passionately about some of the stuff we covered may have elicited from me the best work I'd done up to that point. Neil was just already a master at that point. He could have probably illustrated the phone book and made it look exciting.
The Green Lantern and Green Arrow run is considered a very classic part of Green Lantern's history. Those comic books themselves, I mean, they've been collected over and over in hardcovers and special volumes because of the quality of the stories.
Archie Goodwin and Mike Carlin and I were group editors, and Kevin Dooley and Eddie Berganza were in charge of Green Lantern, and it was floundering. In order to save the franchise, it needed to be revamped.
They were having trouble locking in a direction. They kept on changing the focus. They were trying to reinvent the wheel a little bit. And then there was also a logic, from what I understand, that the Green Lantern Corps was a detriment, not a positive for the franchise. So the goal was to collapse the Corps and make one Green Lantern the sole Green Lantern and shake it up a little bit.
We were actually working on the death of Superman. And one of the things we wanted to do was come up with some big dramatic elements. And we said, let's destroy a city. So I came up with the idea of wanting to destroy Coast City, which was the base of operations for Green Lantern. And what we had was an alien threat that came down, destroyed Coast City, where the entire city, for the most part, was vaporized. If you're a hero, and your job is to save people, to protect people, and your city is atomized as part of that, that is a tremendous psychic sort of wound. And that became the springboard by which he eventually went down the road of becoming Parallax.
He wanted to rebuild the city, so he tried to rebuild it with his ring, and he didn't have enough power.
He couldn't bring back millions of people like that, and it ended up destroying him.
So he needed to gain more power, and he went throughout the universe murdering other lanterns, trying to grab their power.
He kind of went a little bit off the deep end, taking on and pretty much destroying the Green Lantern Corps and winding up on Oa, where he decimated the rest of the ranks of the Corps and stepped into the main power battery, becoming this entity known as Parallax, and then nothing could stop him. The fans were very upset. One of the covers we did was him with multi-rings on his hands and just looking very crazy. And it was just a wild look. You definitely thought, okay, things are gonna change here. This is not the Hal we all remembered.
At that same time, we were doing a company-wide crossover called 0 Hour that I was writing and drawing. And what we started to realize is we had this tremendous character in development, Parallax, and we could take him and really use him to be this ultimate sort of, I'd almost say visionary villain. In 0 Hour, what Hal did was try and recreate reality. Take it to the brink, take it apart, and put it back together again as he wanted it. So it made him villainous, it made him somewhat godlike, and it certainly put him on a much higher level than he had been previously. Hal Jordan dies as a result of that, primarily because his best friend at that time, Oliver Queen, is the Green Arrow, and Kyle, his replacement, work together to bring him to an end, because that's the only way they can stop him. An awful lot of people really did not like that at all. They didn't like the idea that Hal Jordan would have that kind of cathartic event.
It was pretty intense. I remember the editor at the time was Kevin Dooley, and he was at conventions, and back then there was more of a letter column presence in the books, and lots of stacks of letters, and there were death threats and little, things like that. How dare you kill Hal? You should die.
You got some new characters out of it. You got Kyle Rayner out of it. I think it gives Hal Jordan, when you pull back and look at his whole life, it gives him something very interesting. So if you take that little slice of Remember Twilight? It looks like a disservice to Hal Jordan. But in the grand scheme of things, if you could pull way back and look at everything that's happened since he's been introduced until now, it actually was something that was really good that happened, because I think it made for a very interesting story and it let all this other stuff grow.
It pushed things forward. And it wasn't the final chapter in the story. It was the first chapter in the story in a lot of ways.
It all started with a situation where GL was sort of very soft in sales for quite a while, and Hal wasn't the Green Lantern, and I was looking at the books as an editor there at DC and said, man, it'd be really sweet to get Hal back into the mix again. So I went down to the editor who was editing it at the time and said, you want to let go of Green Lantern? He was like, yeah, all right. You know, if you want it, you know, you can have it. So I went to Dan DiDio's office and said, hey, can I bring back Hal and start it off with a big bang and get it rolling again? He was like, sure.
Peter was the editor that hired me to do Green Lantern Rebirth. We talked about it and said this is what Green Lantern Rebirth could be. He put a lot of faith in me when I was still an up-and-coming writer, and I owe him a lot for that because he gave me the opportunity where I could do this with Green Lantern. Without Peter, none of this would have happened.
Jeff had very clear interpretations of what he wanted to do with Green Lantern. He had a very clear idea because he understood the universe, not just how it worked, but how it could work.
My challenge was, if I was going to bring Hal Jordan back to be Green Lantern, I had two ways to go. He tries to redeem himself, and then the book's about a mass murdering hero who's trying to be a good guy again, and he'll never redeem himself. And I had absolutely no interest in writing a story about a superhero trying to redeem themselves from mass murder, because that's not what Green Lantern's about. Green Lantern's not about redemption. Green Lantern's about overcoming fear. So I thought maybe I could look at it a little bit more clever and say, well, what would push a character like Hal Jordan, who had never acted like that? What would make him suddenly go way off and lose it like that? I wanted to look at everything and find an emotional reason or something that we could relate to. And in the mythology, it had always been, well, Green Lantern's ring can't work on yellow because of an impurity in the battery. In the comic books for years and years, it was like if he shot his beam at a yellow sign, it wouldn't do anything. And eventually that was removed because it's a little dated. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit. And in Green Lantern Rebirth, I looked at it and I thought, well, yellow's the color of fear. That's obvious. And I assumed that that's why they originally used yellow, as it was the color of fear. So I wanted to get into it more. And that's when I started to develop the Parallax entity. So Parallax became an entity of fear rather than an identity that Hal Jordan became. He didn't become a villain, Parallax, but it was actually Parallax, the entity, that took him over, found a flaw in him, a weakness, emotional weakness when the city was destroyed, and was able to exploit him and possess him and fester inside him. It's like a parasite, Parallax. And so once I had that, once Parallax developed into that, and it was really the last piece, then everything came together.
And that was the key to unraveling the whole thing and explaining why the world's greatest superhero, in my opinion, and a man without fear, would collapse so entirely and do something so horrible.
Ethan also, as an artist, had such a strong interpretation visually of what he believed Green Lantern could be and how his world can look.
I started making real substantial changes in the way Green Lantern was portrayed. People would say, well, his costume, it's made of energy. It comes from his ring. His ring will project his costume onto him. And yet, every time I ever saw Green Lantern drawn by any artist, his costume had little fabric-y folds in it. The arms and his legs of his suit were supposed to be black, and yet they were gray because they were reflecting light back the way spandex does. And so that was the first thing that I thought, boy, we've got to fix that right away. If his costume is literally made of energy, this part needs to be solid black. It's the absence of light. And not only that, it's tremendously exciting when you strip away that gray, which is a weak color against green, and just put solid black. And suddenly the green went vroom, and it lit up right away. And I started to think, if it's a projection of his ring and if it's made of energy, it could do other things. It's a lot like those billboards that you see in downtown Tokyo. They're always moving, they're always alive, they're made of energy. And so I just thought, let's take that little emblem on his chest and let's pop it out like a 3D hologram and then just make it around him at all times, just a projection so that it's like a police badge. All these ideas popped into my head for how to present Green Lantern in a brand new and fresh way.
We had to make sure it met the fans' expectations. We had to make sure as a writer it challenged all the stories. As an editor, we had to make sure that it worked well within the continuity of DC Universe. And as a publisher, we had to make sure that it made money. So when you put all those aspects together and you're able to succeed at all those levels, you know you got a big winner on your hands.
I knew that Green Lantern had fans that loved him and loved the whole mythology as rabidly as Star Trek fans do. And so I tried to put that out of my mind so I didn't seize up and paralyze myself with fear and just go ahead and just try things and just try things. And if they hated it, they hated it. I'd be gone in 6 issues and let somebody else take it from there. And the response, the feedback was wonderful. It was warm. Everyone seemed to be really, really happy and excited about it.
Green Lantern Rebirth, I think, surprised a lot of people. Hal Jordan was a lost and forgotten character. There was no more stories to tell. And I think Rebirth showed people there's a lot of stories for these characters, as these characters are timeless. Sinestro is a very complicated character, and one of my absolute favorite characters to write in all of comics.
The problem with Sinestro originally was that he's not a very serious villain, nor does he seem like a substantial threat. And yet, we're told of how important he is to the Green Lantern mythos because he used to be the greatest Green Lantern, and then he left the Corps. Jeff and I would have these conversations where we realized that Sinestro is a political villain.
I think Sinestro does everything he does because he still believes in the Green Lantern Corps. Even in the comics when he's fallen, he still believes in the Green Lantern Corps. And everything he does in his crazy, screwed up way is to help the Green Lantern Corps, help them become a better force for good for the universe. If it was up to Sinestro, he'd probably have a Green Lantern on every planet, lording over that planet, very militant-like. And he would think that was a good thing, that's protecting people. He doesn't quite see oppression, but he's very oppressive.
And so I started to model this silly character after a fascist dictator. And I gave him a more severe haircut, parted harshly on the side, heavy bags under his eyes, never smiling, dour, sinister, and arrogant. Suddenly the character started to come alive. I would say, Jeff, if possible, I don't want to see Sinestro do anything. I mean, when he's fighting other Green Lanterns, these are dogs. I want to see him do this. He makes his ring do the work and he just sits there and watches it happen because he will not lower himself to actually do something physical. But Hal's different. He's got intense feelings of competition with Hal, so he will get physical with him.
His rise to becoming known as the greatest Green Lantern, then his fall from that, and his status as a renegade and the ultimate rivalry he has with Jordan that develops into a full-on archenemy is a pretty great arc for him. When I took on the book, I really wanted to bring back the epic grandiose of Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps and what it meant to the greater DC universe at large. If you've got the universe divided into 3,600 sectors, think of the universe as a sphere, and each sector is a kind of a pyramid or a pie wedge. And so all the sectors point to Oa. So when you're on Oa, no matter what sector you're from, you're actually still in your sector. So Oa is this meeting point of all the sectors and hence all the Green Lanterns. It's this vast, cool place where you turn the corner and you meet another weird alien Green Lantern. And their cultures are different, their attitudes are different, their methods of working are different. And I wanted to feel a little bit more like a cop show. So I had 2 Green Lanterns per sector, so everybody had a partner. So right now we have currently 7,200 Green Lanterns in the universe.
If there was anything difficult about drawing him, it was the sheer number. There were so many. So very many.
Alien life forms are always fun. Some are crazy, some are comical, some are powerful.
Mogo was great to draw because he's a big circle. So the idea of Mogo is cool anyway, but as far from the artist standpoint, if I got a page that said splash page of Mogo, I thought, well, this is gonna be a short day. I'll be done in an hour. So he was fun to draw, and I liked the character. Some of the other characters, I really like Ismat Cole, who's the lizard fellow. Sornik Natu.
If you get to draw her, it's like, oh yeah, I get to draw Sornik. She's hot.
Estelle was a kind of a cool character. He was like a retro 50s sci-fi, with the tentacle arms and the giant bucket head. Buzzed. It was great. I love drawing that. And he was Mogo's partner. So here you had, the biggest Green Lantern of Mogo is a planet, and Buzzed, who's the smallest. He's a fly, basically, with a power ring, and they were partners. It was great, just fun stuff.
Any of the big guys were a lot of fun too. Hanu, big guy made out of rock.
Who comes from a world where it's looked down upon if you use a weapon. They're all fighters and warriors, but if you use a weapon, it's kind of shameful, so he never wants to use his ring.
The Green Lantern universe is filled with characters that are fun to draw. I've yet really to draw one that I haven't enjoyed.
There's all these wonderful characters on Oa when you go there, so every time you're going there, every time Hal goes there, he meets somebody new. When I first came up with the concept of parallax being the yellow impurity or yellow fear, and that it was a part of a bigger emotional spectrum, I really wanted to define the power and make it about emotion, because Green Lantern was about emotion. It was about fear and willpower, and it balanced out. But that didn't mean that there weren't other things out there to explore. And so slowly, I wanted to peel back the layers that there's an entire emotional spectrum out there that every emotion we give off is real. And so I looked at the spectrum of colors, and green being the center, and kind of felt like this is the most stable of emotion. This willpower is the most stable, pure of emotion. And as you start to go out from the center, you have fear on one side. And fear and willpower are very close because they're tied in together. And on the other side of fear, you've got hope, blue, which identifies the blue lanterns. And hope is very much connected to willpower, because if you hope for something all day long, nothing happens. But if you combine that hope with action, which is willpower, then you can be a stronger person. You can make things that you want to happen in a good, positive way. If you go to the far end of the spectrum is red, which is rage. And rage is uncontrollable. We all experience rage. And it just kind of comes out and you're not thinking properly. Orange was avarice, which is greed. Indigo is compassion. And then on the other far end of the spectrum is love, violet. And so you've got these two emotions that are probably the strongest emotions that we have, rage and love. And as you come in closer to the emotional spectrum, you've got the balance of willpower, and willpower really is our ability to kind of deal with all our emotions.
And suddenly you had all these different cores, and it's just an amazing element to the mythos that deepens it, enriches it, and adds a hell of a lot of cool action beats with all these different conflicting core that have different visions of how the universe wants to be. It was key. I mean, it's got a real originality to it.
Unlike Superman, necessarily, and unlike Batman, because many of us will never become fabulously wealthy, the idea that if we were the bravest and the most fearless, a little ring could come from outer space and say, I choose you to join this cosmic police corps where it's your job to patrol the universe. This is a fantasy that engages everyone.
It's different than anything else. The GL core and the GL universe and the mythology of that, there's no other comics out there that have that kind of source material to draw from and that kind of angle.
It's not just about a guy in a suit wearing a ring and willpower. It's about this incredibly rich world, rich universe that's policed by Green Lanterns. Each one of them are unique, and each one of them have looked different, but they're all united by a common goal and a common cause. I think that's what makes this world exciting. The mythology is as wide as the universe and as the worlds that populate it.
It's too big to compare to another superhero. You compare it to Star Wars, you compare it to Lord of the Rings, you compare it to epic worlds like that. It's bigger than any superheroes. It's its own giant universe. And that's why I think in the comics it's exploded so much in the last few years, is because the mythology has been explored and kind of realized by myself and all these other great artists and writers, and it just keeps growing. It has this depth, this emotional tale that I think is a modern myth. You know, really, DC characters are modern day myths, and this is one of the great ones.
I feel like when I read the script I could relate to this guy and I felt inspired by him. And I know that in my own experience, when I look fear in the face, I'm capable of doing things that I previously thought were impossible. And that's the essence of Hal. That's who I think everybody has within them as well. And I think that's why people fall in love with this guy. Hal Jordan is the classic American hero that I grew up watching and loving. He can throw a punch, he can kiss the girl, and he can tell a joke. To infinity and beyond, and by the power of Grayskull. He's kind of got it all. He's like the perfect superhero for me to play.
One of the greatest things about Hal is there's an issue where he's talking to another superhero and they say, I don't know how your secret identity works, because Clark Kent acts completely different when he's Superman. Bruce Wayne's different when he's Batman. You're exactly the same. You have a mask that big and you're exactly the same.
Settle, keep the life and the energy in it, keep it real. And action!
There's no delineation between Hal and Green Lantern. Ryan's the perfect Hal Jordan.
He is Hal Jordan. Ryan is somebody that people really like. Everybody that I've talked to is like, oh my God, he's the best guy.
Ryan's got that thing. He's so inherently likable, self-effacing.
I'm glad to have a chance to thank you.
No thanks necessary, miss.
No, it is. You saved my life.
Got it?
He's got a sense of humor, not only about other people, but about himself.
No thanks necessary.
Hal's got the right stuff, really. You know, he's from that era of guys that just kick ass and take names.
As she comes into Hal, off you go. Bum, bum, bum. I want to track in with her to there. And reverse, bum, 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 into here. Hal Jordan is hiding behind a mask of maverick, very undisciplined, shoot from the hip, irresponsible.
He's gonna maybe do a little flying today. What do you think?
I think you're late.
Yes.
All of the things that you might wonder why the ring ever chose him in the first place. Which is all, of course, hiding emotional bruising, basically.
One of my favorite scenes I ever wrote, Carlos Pacheco drew it. It was beautiful. He was flying a plane, trying to catch the bad guy. Hal's ring was out of juice. Bad guy's falling, and Hal just ejects and jumps after him. No ring, no parachute, just heading after the bad guy. I'll figure it out on the way down, and that's kind of his motto.
Hal embodies everything I love to bring to the screen.
Ryan's got the acting ability to be able to pull that character off.
Here we go, and action.
Okay, so at the party, how did you make that big green ramp thingy?
Anything I can see in my mind, I can create.
Ryan's a really easy person to get along with, and Martin was really great in letting us just improv and play off of each other a little bit and see what we could make of it.
Hal. Oh my God, Hal!
How did you know it was me?
What do you mean? I've known you my whole life. I've seen you naked. You don't think I would recognize you because I can't see your cheekbones?
Cut it. That was a good one.
The mask for Green Lantern, that's a big component to the character. I had to have these dots on my face and my neck.
We needed tracking markers for the visual effects department. We did a live cast on Ryan so that every day the tracking markers are in exactly the same place.
It's a kind of an excruciating process because they mold your head. You're dipped in about 15 pounds, it seems like, almost, of stuff. And you can't really breathe, and you just want to rip this thing off of your face because you're only breathing out a couple of straws in your nostrils.
Careful, careful. Ow.
Oh, it was nice to have a little peace and quiet. It's kind of an awful, uncomfortable, claustrophobic experience, but a necessary evil.
Oh my God.
I was given a very fortunate opportunity to have a great deal of prep for this movie, so I cleared my schedule for almost 8 or 9 months and just worked primarily on getting ready for the role.
6 days a week he was in the gym, always up at 4 in the morning doing his weights. He had a trainer. He stuck to it religiously, and it always made me laugh because on Saturdays he was allowed to go and drink and eat as much as he wanted. He had the one day off during the week where he could do that.
Action!
A lot of gymnastics, which is something I don't necessarily recommend for anyone over 6 feet. Fell on my face a whole lot of times before I started to land some of those particularly crazy moves.
3, 2, 1, action!
A ton of flexibility and weightlifting and all that usual garbage that most actors like to romanticize in interviews such as this one.
This movie has a lot of visual effects and a lot of CGI, but it's much of the action we really wanted done
action
for real, on camera by Ryan, and he was amazing that way.
Action!
When they asked me to, be suspended and fly in and kick the bad guy all in one shot. I'm the guy that's gonna say, yes, I can do that.
I need to begin the kick a little early, maybe a second earlier. Yeah.
Sit.
All right, go.
Roll, please.
My job is to show up on set, look Martin Campbell in the eye, and never ever tell him no.
Right, here we go, and 3, 2, 1, action!
The first time he's going to take off for the planet Oa, and the green energy is bringing him up to the planet to be inducted as a Green Lantern. I remember that exact night.
When we did it on the night, it was going up to 90 foot, and we was probably doing 40 foot a second, which is pretty fast. We rehearsed the move with the stunt guy.
3, 2, 1, go!
It's terrifying. It's good to get fighting it like crazy.
Then we put Ryan in the cables and basically said, well, look, we're not going to sort of give you a rehearsal. We just want to get your natural reaction. Flying someone 95 foot up in the air is not your everyday experience, especially for an actor to be fired up in the air that high and that fast.
Good. Clear. You ready to go? Here we go.
Sort of pressed the button, got the natural reaction.
Stand by. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go!
The bottom of his stomach dropped out. I mean, he yelled at the top of his lungs, and it wasn't premeditated. That's just what happened.
It's always that thing that when you look up at 95 foot, it's not too bad, but when you're up looking down, it looks a long way.
Oh, joy. Was it fun? Yeah. It's it's a mixture of fun and explosive diarrhea.
And go!
The most odd non sequiturs would fly out of my mouth as soon as we reached the apex. Some random 80s television sitcom reference. Like I'd get up to the top and just scream, Alan Thicke! Everyone wants to play the hero, that's a lot of fun. But also get to be funny and have a lightness to the character and really have that ability to play. And I think I found my dream role with Hal Jordan.